Now, an Irish green card holder made headlines recently when she was detained by immigration officials in the US after returning from a trip to Cork. Cliona Ward had been living in the US legally for decades but was taken into custody and faces deportation over a small number of minor convictions. Her case has sent shockwaves through the Irish community there, but it might not be isolated. I'm joined now from the US by US immigration attorney Caro Kinsella. Caro, have you, in your practice, seen a difference in how people are being treated entering the country?
Yes, since the cornerstone of the Trump administration campaign was border security. So border security is very strict. When you are seeking entry into the United States, whether that's a temporary visa, a permanent visa such as green card, or even the visa waiver, the ESTA that you file online, do expect to be adjudicated more stringently by CBP. These are Custom Border Protection Officers at the port of entry, and they have the powers, plenary powers, to deny your entry, cancel your visa. And what I'm noting in my office is an uptick in secondary inspection by CBP. That's where they will pull you into a back room, question you for hours. It is actually an interrogation, and that then will cause inadmissibility issues and you will be denied entry. So there's a huge uptick in that since the Trump administration. And
what about within the community in the States, Caro? I mean, particularly people like Cliona, who had a kind of a minor drug conviction and some traffic offences from years ago. I'd imagine people like that are very, very nervous about leaving the country and trying to get back in, are they?
Well, speaking about that case, the Trump administration can technically not be blamed for that because there are laws in place. For example, expungements do not erase past convictions, and green card holders, depending on past convictions, arrests, etc., can get themselves into situations where they can be ordered, removed, and deported from the United States. So, not speaking specifically about the case, but the Trump administration has not impacted green card holders and whether there's past convictions, etc. What the Trump administration has done is they have made stringent moves on immigration. For example, if you're a non-US citizen and you're inside the United States, anyone from the age of 14, President Trump ordered under an executive order since January of this year what's called the AROR. That's an Alien Registration Report. And anyone that's inside the United States must give their name, address, legal status if they're applying for a visa inside the United States. So there's more strict adjudication and tightened policies because of, this border security that they have really gone for, so to speak.
And, I mean, the advice then you give to people who contact your office, people who have concerns about, leaving the country and coming back in, people on this side of the pond who have questions about, whether they will get through. Has that advice changed? Or, in response, I guess, to the point you make about Cliona, is it the same as it ever was?
Yeah, I would always advise clients they should never be entering the United States. They should never be going to the consulate unless they speak to an attorney. All of my clients are fully prepped because what I will advise your listeners is if you are entering the United States, you must know the legal requirements for the visa that you are entering under. And the second piece of advice I would give you is absolutely speak the truth. But what I'm hearing is clients and people speaking to me, and they're giving too much information away, and it's bringing them down another yellow brick road, so to speak. So you want to keep your answers short, concise, and succinct, because if you confound an officer, they're going to default on denying you because they're trying to protect the US border.
Mark, you're over and back quite a bit to the States, and you would have been there relatively recently. I mean, what's the sense you get among, say, the Irish community, the Irish American community who are in the States, be they first, second or third generation, whatever?
I think it's a difference with the Irish American population, to be quite honest, and the people I would know who, for example, would work with immigrants who've just arrived. I have a friend of mine who speaks Spanish, teaches Spanish at a local immigrant centre. People are stopping they won't turn up anymore. The students are not going to that place anymore because they fear ICE will pounce and throw them out. And I think we need to have a careful distinction here between the policy that's popular among Americans, which is close the border to illegal immigration, and what will we do with the people who are already here illegally? And that second part, what ICE is doing, what Donald Trump is doing, is showing a certain lack of regard for things like due process. So libertarian supporters of the president looking at armed men turning up and taking kids and sending them back to a place that they're not citizens of. That triggers something for a lot of right-wing Americans. And I think also for the first, second generation immigrants who voted for Trump to stop illegals coming in when they came here legally are seeing their communities now under siege. And they're people who Trump really needs. He needs the kind of Joe Rogan, who complained recently about the ways in which ICE is acting. And he needs these second generation or first generation legal immigrants who are the vital next generation. And right now, that's where the cracks are appearing. It's what happens to the people already here that are illegal, as opposed to how do you stop that border being porous.
He also needs a certain amount of those so-called illegal immigrants. It's not a kind of a term I tend to use, but we'll stick with it for the purpose of this, Cormac, in certain industries, like the agricultural industry, for example, and he knows this. So one wonders whether, and it's a point I put to Cal Thomas earlier, whether there's a degree of optics in all of this.
Well, I think it's a huge amount of optics, and it's another example of Trump just pushing his initial position being one where he pushes enormously out and will respond then to pushback. And it's important, therefore, to push back. It's interesting that President Zelensky of Ukraine had a disastrous press conference in the Oval Office a few months ago. But there, at the Pope's funeral, he was chatting in a very friendly fashion to Trump. I don't think Trump takes things too personally beyond a certain point. And therefore, it's important. I find it very notable that there's been a very sharp drop-off in Canadian tourism bookings to the United States, even though the dollar has fallen by 10%, so it's a lot cheaper. And I'm not hearing voices from the US tourism industry telling Trump, hang on a minute, you're alienating our customers, think of us. So I think people have to push back against Trump rather than just take this lying down, and he will react, he will factor it in.
Can I ask actually about Canada, now that you've brought it up, and this kind of harks back to a conversation we were having a little bit earlier. One of the narratives has been that Trump is just another manifestation of this rising tide of populism around the world. And then we had Mark Carney re-elected in Canada against all the odds, certainly a few months ago. Is that, in your mind, just an aberration, a kind of a one-off, or indicative of maybe a sea change?
No, I think it is indicative of Trump discrediting the right-of-centre conservative political position that he has championed. And neighbours looking across the border who had been thinking of voting conservative in a Canadian political context saying, thanks, but no thanks.
Hannah, might we see that manifest then in other countries as well? A discrediting of the Trump candidate, as it were, wherever they exist?
I guess Ireland was one of the few countries to keep its governments in power. So, I think we have to see the next elections. I think Trump acts in kind of mysterious ways. And I think certainly in the Middle East, most of the states in the Middle East are ruled by autocratic leaders. They're kind of familiar with the kind of styles of policies that Trump is using. They're familiar with that autocracy. So, I think it's definitely it's demoralizing for a lot of activists in some of these countries who would have seen America as something of a beacon and kind of, adhered to that idea of, elections and democracy.
Mark, this is slightly tangential to the migration piece, but it's just something that struck me is that successive Irish governments, right up until recently, up until Enda Kenny, would have always on Patrick's Day lobbied for the undocumented Irish.
Right.
It was the done thing. Obviously, I'll mention the undocumented Irish.
Right.
And I know this is more a reflection of kind of the changing landscape in this country, but it'd be hard to imagine Micheál Martin or anybody else in the future doing it.
There's always a remnant of people who are there. There's still that problem. Let's separate that out from something else. The Irish in America, in all honesty, are MAGA. You go there and they are the story, right, of the cop and the nurse who had a kid, who became a lawyer, and that advancement through American society, of that
American
working
dream
class,
we talked about.
That American dream. And, from the 60s where they were democratic, and then Reagan came along and had that shining city in the hill, and the Irish in America, in many ways, are at the heart of the emergence of this MAGA movement. And I think it's really important for us to look at that history. But we can also see back in history when the know-nothings, who were the 19th century of MAGA, attacked the Irish. So I think knowing our history, where we are now in America, where most Irish Americans are all like a fifth Irish, a fifth Filipino. Half my family are like this. And they appreciate their history. But right now, they're very much pro-MAGA because this, for them, is that sense of the American dream given to everybody. And I think one of the things I notice about our debate is we're at the end of a super cycle of history now. Globalization has kind of come to a sputtering stop.
But it's amazing the pace at which that's happened.
Right.
You know, it's the classic thing of ask, when did the Roman Empire collapse? Ask the person tilling the field in Tuscany. They don't know.
And in many ways, Trump, as someone said, is asking the right questions but delivering the wrong answers to this moment of change. And I think in so many ways we should step back and say, in 10 years' time, the history books will not record this first 100 days. They'll probably be recording the way AI impacted employment. But the one thing we can gain from this first 100 days is like, stuff has stopped dead. History has just stopped. And how it restarts is in our hands. And
the end of history. That's what we're calling it.
The beginning
Francis
of history.
Fukuyama was right.
Beginning.
Eventually.
Yeah.